I was very interested by the discussion that just happened, because this is the precise topic of my presentation, which is it's about the predictive privacy harms of profiling and the ways in which it's Orwellian when it's accurate and Kafkaesque when it's flawed. But to give you a little bit of context, I work for Privacy International. I manage our work on data in the private sector. And in case you don't know, Privacy International is a global nonprofit. We work with partners around the world in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. And we advocate for stronger laws and protections around both government and corporate surveillance. We also investigate and we also litigate. So these are some of the things too. We did an investigation on election and micro-targeting during the election in Kenya. And this is one of our legal cases that we're having against British intelligence agencies. What you see here, those are two versions of myself, so to say. On the left, this is my personality according to Crystal Knows. That's a browser extension and an application that allows you to view personalities of everyone you've ever emailed on Google and all of your LinkedIn connections. However, what you see on the right is my personality and identity according to You Are What You Like. This is the personality prediction tool by the Cambridge Psychometric Center. I do not recognize myself in either of these two. I do not identify as male. I do get into arguments, even when not necessary. But I think the reason why I started with this is I changed careers from academia to working in nonprofit, also partly because I thought this is something I don't just want to explain, I want to challenge it. So long before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, I was very interested in personality predictions. And I've done these two analyses with these tools that are publicly available approximately 4 years ago. And the idea that we can use publicly available data, so to say, to classify people and to derive intimate or almost sensitive details about them is nothing new. This is physiognomy, the debunked pseudoscience of deriving people's personality from their faces. So the idea behind classifying people is almost sort of like even beyond pseudoscience, is inherent in a lot of social science methods. What has changed over recent years, though, is the amount of data from which such inferences and predictions are possible. What I've done here is I've overlaid some of the inferences that can be made from social media data over, this is a Stasi file, so the former East German secret intelligence agency. And what I find so fascinating about these old Stasi documents is it shows how labor-intensive and tedious and time-consuming it was to find out, in fact, sometimes very basic information about someone. What kind of books do they read? Who are their friends? What's their sexual orientation? All of these things are now sort of predictable from other data at varying levels of accuracy. We've summarized some of these research in a report called A Snapshot of Corporate Profiling. And my favorite example, and also I think that's interesting in the Cambridge Analytica context, is that using various combinations of cell phone usage data, so calls, SMS, Bluetooth, and app usage, researchers have been able to predict users' personality traits. So you don't even need the data that Cambridge Analytica used in order to predict someone's personality at a level that is quite accurate. When we talk about algorithms and AI, and I appreciate that these are radically different concepts that are sometimes treated like they are the same, but in our own advocacy and legal analysis, we find that there's a tendency of people to focus on automated decision making in a narrow sense. And the emphasis here is on decisions and automated. But both in our work around GDPR, so data protection law, as well as AI, I always try to make an effort, or we dedicate substantial energy to also talk about the ways in which these very same techniques can be used to infer, derive, and predict knowledge. And a lot of the debates that we're having around decisions apply to profiling as well. So in a way, the example I always give is scoring and predictive policing. It is the police that makes the ultimate arrest decision, but if this decision is made on the basis of a score that the person making the arrest does not understand, cannot question, or cannot interrogate, it doesn't really matter whether the decision is automated. All the biases and problems of the score itself can have very significant effects on people. I want to take a second to talk a bit more about predictive privacy harms. So what does it mean to live in a world where lots of things, sometimes very sensitive details, can be predicted and they may or may not be correct? This is a term that has been coined by Kate Crawford, who's now working at the AI Now Institute. She's a professor at the MIT and also NYU. And what this term predictive privacy harms describes is that, on the one hand, when predictions are very accurate, they can be incredibly privacy invasive, but because they're predictions, there's no guarantee that they are actually accurate. Those are the dystopian examples that we use to show, sort of like, to highlight the privacy implications of very accurate predictions. So this is a real-world example that has been stopped by legal action. So in the US, anti-choice groups used smartphone surveillance to target abortion-minded women while they were in clinics about to have an abortion. And while this is an extreme example from a country that has very different laws that are much weaker in many cases, it shows what's technically possible. It is technically possible to target people, not just particular groups of people, but to target them at a specific point in time at a specific place. And I think in a way, again, this is an extreme example, but it shows what's possible, and those are tools that are available to basically anyone who pays for it. At the same time, however, these dystopian examples are a little bit at odds with how we, or most of us, experience online advertisement. This is, I think, from 5 or 6 years ago, where I collected creepy ads that either me or my friends have seen. And this is my favorite one, which is, on the one hand, sort of like insinuates that my friend is gay, but also asks him to work as a Catholic priest. And the technology critic Sarah Watson has called this the uncanny valley of personalization. And the term the uncanny valley is from robotics. It is the valley at which the robot is human enough to creep us out, but not human enough to pass as human. And the same happens with personalization. And the anxiety in seeing all of these ads, also like embarrassed by your toes or feeling anxious or down, is that either these are completely inaccurate, they might not even be micro-targeted, they might just be targeted at women in their 20s, or they might know more about us than we know about us ourselves. And in a way, there's a fine line, and this is obviously the modern version of attempts to predict people's personality from faces. This is a screenshot of a study that was highly criticized that used machine learning to predict criminality from people's faces. This is obviously not scientific, but in a way, it's sort of like it's a spectrum. In a marketing context, very rough correlationism can be very useful, but the moment we use the very same techniques to make authoritative statements about people's future, it can become incredibly dangerous. I hope I still have 5 minutes or something. So I think if you've been following the scandals over this year, and I've seen every single one of the hearings, the impression you get that the data scandals that involve Facebook and Cambridge Analytica were about something very narrow and manageable. It was about bad actors misusing platforms during elections. And the companies, or the mistake that the companies did was that they reacted too slowly and they reacted too lately, but now they're on it and the problem is solved. So our response to this scandal has always been very different, by saying this is a systemic problem. This is not limited to a bad actor that is misusing platforms. The very idea, I mean, at its core, the Cambridge Analytica scandal is a scandal about profiling. It's about the ways in which anyone with enough access to data can derive uncannily accurate or inaccurate insights about people. So this is by a report called Corporate Surveillance in Everyday Life that I highly recommend, that basically shows in the commercial sector, identities have been linked for a long time, and attributes about people have been derived for a long time. But what has changed in recent years is the amount of data that is available. This is another slide from this talk. So our interpretation of this scandal has always been this is marketing data, this is risk data, and this is the public sector and government surveillance in a way. Because so much commercial data is available, and because this is mostly non-consumer facing, and people are not aware about what is happening to their data, lots of different actors can tap into these systems. And we know, for example, that public authorities in the UK use marketing data in predictive policing. We know that foreign actors have an interest in tapping into marketing data in order to target people. And this is not just us being activists to make the argument that this is a systemic issue, but what's very interesting is that the most interesting thing for me about the current ongoing ICO investigation is its scope, much more than its content. So the ICO is currently investigating all major political parties, credit referencing agencies, data brokers, and even a parenting blog. And this is the example that you might have seen in the news. The Labour Party bought data on more than 1 million new and expectant mothers from a data broker that got this data from a parenting blog called Emma's Diary. And in a way, for me, this is the perfect example that shows how data travels these days. Also, what's quite interesting, the ICO found that all major political parties were using tools to predict people's ethnicity, which is not lawful. So I think this is about privacy, but it's about a lot more. I think at the very core, this is about human autonomy and control of your own identity. And sort of like being confronted with this is me, or this is how I'm being seen. It means that companies that most people have never heard of use data that I don't even know exists, that I have very little control over, to construct identities that may or may not be accurate, and these identities then form the basis of decisions. And I'm running out of time, but I just want to use the last minute to say what we are currently doing about this. So we are currently using and testing data access rights as tools. What you see here is my entire browsing history that I have obtained from an ad tracking company. And I think this is also a tool that's interesting to use by social scientists. And then through access requests, you can see how you're being classified. Those are assumptions about my gender, my income, whether I have children, my interests, what kind of cars I might like. I don't have a car. We're also filing complaints. And ultimately, I think it is important to create legal precedent that sort of like determines what the rules are. And I can't really talk about this, but we're about to announce something that is related to this next week. Thank you.